It would be really nice on the days when I have road rage to be able to have a grenade launcher. But my Second Amendment rights don't extend that far.
Anybody can buy an AR-15 and they kill people.
You can assault anybody with a pencil, a knife, a car, a lawnmower, your fist, with your words.
The right of the citizens to bear arms in defense of themselves and the state shall not be questioned.
I'm not someone who's anti-Second Amendment, but I do want to see reasonable interpretation of the Second Amendment.
The Second Amendment is antiquated. It was written 270 years ago.
It shouldn't be harder for me to purchase Sudafed at the pharmacy than it is to purchase a gun.
Our right to own and bear any kind of weapon, in my mind, is granted to us from our God.
And the more fear that is ginned up and instilled in our community, the more guns they sell.
I think that everybody needs to have their voices heard at these kinds of events.
So there's 168 people here in this building, so thank you all for coming out. Today we are here to listen to what local students have to say about gun violence in America. I actually came here right after my detention, which I received for walking out of school on March 14th. In the National School Walkout. I'm here today because we are tired of watching children be massacred without a second thought.
Do you hear that silent song? Each note is a cry, pleading for mercy. Each beat is a gunshot, deafening and piercing.
We invited everyone, all the PA House and Senate members and their opponents. We invited Congressman Lloyd Smucker, who did not respond to our invite, and Senator Pat Toomey, who was unable to attend. To begin, we'll break out into small group discussions. There should be about 4 to 5 people in your group, so say hi to your neighbors. In these small group sessions, you and your group will be discussing the 3 prompts that are listed over here. What problems or types of violence do you think of when you hear about gun violence? How do you think that changes among different communities? What solutions do you want to see for gun violence? Who needs to be in the conversation to make it possible? What do people get wrong when they talk about gun violence? What do our legislators get wrong?
As far as I know, not that I'm aware of, have had any type of mass shooting that have happened nationally that I know of.
It was parallel parking, and they said I bumped into their van, and I said, I apologize and all of that. And then they asked me if I had bullets in my car, and I said, I'm guessing 9 out of 10 of them, maybe more, and these kids get to this guy, get it illegally.
NRA definitely have a big part of it because they don't want anybody talking about, sensible, rational gun laws in government because that's money for them.
If someone grabs your gun and shoots someone, the person who owns this gun should be held responsible.
So this is where you guys are going to be able to ask questions. We have questions. You guys can make comments or briefly discuss what came up in your small group discussion.
On the issue of assault weapons, I think there's a sort of a corruption or a lack of legitimacy about it being a right of the Second Amendment.
I am a student of color, and I would feel uncomfortable if my teachers were to be armed.
I have heard that social workers aren't allowed into our schools and that they aren't allowed to be in there. And with some of the mental health problems and some of the issues that our students face that often result in school violence, I'm wondering what we can do to get more people on the scene who can be helpful to our students.
Well, first of all, I believe in school resource officers. I was when I worked with the city, part of the Safe Schools, Healthy Students initiative on behalf of the mayor. And they are not only there for protection, they are there, they end up as buddies of the students and they really feel secure. So I guess I'm wondering, do you support the idea of more SROs in our schools, and also non-lethal means like tasers and other things that the teachers and the entire staff could employ if necessary?
There are options that manufacturers could put in place trigger locks and things that could reduce the lethality of weapons without threatening the individual's right to have them, if that's territory that we can't get past.
Is it unreasonable to expect our own state legislature to pass any kind of smart gun control, reasonable gun control?
I'd like to see the legislature do common sense gun control issues by requiring the background check on firearm purchases for all, not just from a store, but when you privately sell a gun. Currently in Pennsylvania, you may buy a rifle or a shotgun from a private individual without a background check. That would be common sense. The other thing the state legislature has to do to prevent a tragedy like Florida is to require that law enforcement uphold their duty. In Florida, that individual was seen anywhere from 26 to 30 times by law enforcement, kicked out of a school for having bullets and a knife. No one did anything. The FBI was warned. No one did anything. For those of you who don't know, any one of those convictions would have prevented that shooter from buying a gun. The law would have worked for us. But instead, they want to get up and grandstand, blame honest gun owners and NRA for the tragedy, when the failure was a direct result of the school district, the state, the local, and the federal government failing to uphold the laws on the books.
During the Reagan administration, we had you couldn't buy an AR-15 because they aren't used for hunting. They are for killing people. And now anybody can buy an AR-15 and they kill people.
Just for some framing, I'm first and foremost a mom. I have kids in our middle school here in the city and in an elementary school here in the city, so I see things through that lens as well, and about them coming home and talking about the preparation that they're doing for intruder drills in school and what that looks like and how they prepare. I'm also a resident of Southeast Lancaster City, and I've lived and worked my entire adult life in communities that have been lower income communities of color where gun violence on my block is not uncommon. The person I'm running against had more outside spending from the National Rifle Association than just about anyone else running for Congress last year. And I want us to remember the power that the NRA has is primarily at this moment as a gun manufacturer's lobby. And the more fear that is ginned up and instilled in our community, the more guns they sell. There's a financial interest in this that we need to keep rational and understand and recognize that our collective voice as citizens should be louder than the gun manufacturer's lobby. As a candidate, I'm in favor of things that are popular with the majority of Americans. Common sense gun reform, and to me that means comprehensive background checks. We should fund mental health. I'm an advocate for single payer health care, and I believe that with comprehensive universal health care.
I grew up in a home that I would describe as blue-collar working class, and my father is a lifelong Republican, and he was, until about 5 years ago, a diehard member of the NRA. He left that organization because he grew weary of what he viewed as some of the propaganda and fear-mongering that was being pushed forward by the organization. He really wanted the organization to be really what it was when I was growing up, which was an organization that promoted gun safety, safe usage of firearms, hunter safety courses, and kind of love of the outdoors. I understand that folks want to have access to firearms for hunting. I also understand that a lot of folks enjoy target shooting, they like skeet shooting, and there are a number of people who want to have access to firearms for home protection. So I think it's important to note I'm not someone who's anti-Second Amendment, but I do want to see reasonable interpretation of the Second Amendment. I definitely don't support arming our teachers. But I also have to wonder, we have schools here in Lancaster and throughout the state of Pennsylvania who are using textbooks that are over 10 years old. We have schools that were built prior to 1970 and don't necessarily have the up-to-date and modern safety precautions that some newer schools have. We have schools that have poor heating and cooling systems, leaky roofs. We have schools that are cutting guidance counselors, school psychologists, school resource officers, nurses. And I have to wonder, if we are cutting all of these resources, Where are we getting money to train teachers in safety, in the necessary skills needed to protect their students if they're carrying a firearm? Who is, handling the insurance and the liability that comes with having teachers carry weapons on school property? I'm not sure how we can fund all of those things when we can't fund current up-to-date textbooks for our students. And I would also say that I would also support universal background checks.
I'm so glad that you're standing up, because it's really making a lot of us stand up in a way we haven't been doing for you, and I'd like to apologize for that. I think what Michelle said is really important. The NRA is not what it was. We don't begrudge those memberships, but we do begrudge the power that that organization has and uses in your name. And our representatives are not listening to the majority of Pennsylvanians. Right here in Lancaster, Terry Madonna's research group just published a study. Pennsylvania residents want common sense gun laws. 86%.
This is our democracy. We need to work together. The folks that we vote for, the folks that we represent or that are elected, should represent us. So if you don't like what you're seeing, if you don't like what you're getting, make sure you show up and vote. I work in a high school. I've done these drills with students. I've done them with kids as young as 5 years old. I've been locked in a bathroom for a Mr. Red drill with a group of ESL 5-year-olds. You try and explain that to them when they can barely understand English, why you're locked in a bathroom and why no one should be flushing the toilet right now. Now we can laugh about that, but this is serious, and this is the environment that they've grown up in.
I grew up with guns. I had 2 brothers and my father. We all went hunting. There were 50 or 60 guns at my house all the time. Every closet had 3 or 4 guns in them. There were guns under the bed. There were guns everywhere. None of them were assault weapons, though. None of them were for the purpose of killing people. We're lucky on any given day to muster 60 votes for reasonable gun control out of 203 members. Had it not been for Governor Wolf, and I would urge you all to pay attention to this in this coming gubernatorial election, had it not been for Governor Wolf's veto, the NRA or any organization that had a member in the state of Pennsylvania could have sued any municipality for passing any gun law that was different than the state's gun laws. So if you said, you have to report stolen guns, you could have had somebody, I've gone fishing in Montana and Idaho, and if I join a sportsman's group there, and I say to them, I want you to sue the municipality in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, that law would have allowed that organization in Idaho to sue Lancaster City for passing a gun law that said you have to report stolen guns. So that's how absurd, and that passed in both the House and the Senate in Pennsylvania. Had it not been for the governor vetoing that, we'd be living with that law. It would be really nice on the days when I have road rage to be able to have a grenade launcher. But my Second Amendment rights don't extend that far. We as a reasonable, rational society have said, I'm sorry, just can't do that. I think as a reasonable, rational society, we can also say no assault weapons. In terms of school social workers and things like that, I think that's the real answer. There is a test that we can now do called it's adverse childhood experiences. And I've been trying to get that into the funding formula for basic education in the state of Pennsylvania so that we can provide additional funds to schools for their children that have adverse childhood experiences.
I'm wondering what our elected officials can do to control the sale of guns near schools and also just the sale of guns in general. So yes, I also have a question about toxic masculinity because most of these school shootings are committed by white men who have demonstrated abusive tendencies towards women in the past. You can assault anybody with a pencil, a knife, a car, a lawnmower, your fist,
with your words. So I find that a lot of people get very, very confused when that term is used. Also that people get confused that AR in itself means assault rifle, when in fact it doesn't. It's just the name of a brand of a particular weapon, of a gun. Sometimes I wish there was more like an outreach program, anti-bullying, being able to outreach these people, and instead of having a walk-out day, a walk-up day. Walk up to people, walk up to the outcast. And so I want to ask you to address, your meanings by using the term assault so loosely, and that if America does have a heart problem, and what we can do to get people to care again.
What is the role of the Second Amendment, and if possible, could you use a historical context to justify that role? How do you define common sense gun control? What do you feel is fueling these shootings? And how do you define assault rifle, and how did you form that definition?
And I will tell you that the Second Amendment is antiquated. It was written 270 years ago. The intention, the primary intent of the Second Amendment is to have an armed militia to protect ourselves from Indian attacks on the frontier. We're well past that at this stage.
We haven't talked about campaign finance, and the NRA could not get into the pockets if we had reformed campaign finance legislation and rules.
What can we do to make schools safer? For example, there are gunshot detectors that are basically just little microphones that can pick up gunshots and report them to police within seconds, and report the exact location of a school shooter within the nearest meter. And they're very cheap, they're like $5 to install. So my question is, why don't we have these?
What you want to do to make sure people of color are engaged in this conversation, because they've been left out, I think, for almost all of it, even now. I think we're still seeing an issue with that.
My name is Ken Krawchuk. I'm the Libertarian Party candidate for governor of Pennsylvania. Thank you all for being here today. I'm tired of hearing about dead students on the 6 o'clock news every night. Question is, how do we stop that? John Lott, a researcher at the University of Chicago, did a nationwide county-level study. He found that the cities with the strongest gun control laws had the most gun crime. The title of his book is More Guns, Less Crime. The Pennsylvania Constitution, Article 1, Section 21 says, quote, "The right of the citizens to bear arms in defense of themselves and the state shall not be questioned." I have no question what that means. If you're tired of seeing dead students on the news every night, defend the right to keep and bear arms.
The two main things that I've been hearing recently are either that I'm wasting my time or that there are different things that I need to be doing. I'd like to know what your thoughts are on how students should be getting engaged and what your plans are to communicate with young people.
I want to just underscore the fact that there have been so many questions that have been coming to me, to my office, to city council members. What can we do here in Lancaster City? The answer is nothing. We are required by law in our zoning to have a space in our zoning for gun shops. We are not allowed to preclude anyone from carrying a gun into City Hall, even though at the State House we go through metal detectors and you're not allowed to have a gun. We were sued in a bill, in language that was attached to a bill about scrap metal, which Representative Sterla alluded to, which would preclude us from requiring individual city residents who are lawful owners of guns, if that gun was lost or stolen, to let us know. These things matter so much on a local level in terms of the work that we are trying to do to protect our residents. And it will be because we are electing people to the State House that represent the majority point of view that this will change. Off-year elections matter, friends. They matter so very much.
You don't need to flip many votes. You need to flip about 30 seats, and then we'll have 90, and they'll have 110. But you know what? The discussion will be a whole lot different.
Yes.
Right now, we don't even bother to debate those things. We just wait for the governor to veto it because we know we're going to lose 2-1. you need to remind your representatives that they're elected not just to represent the people that voted that day, they're elected to represent the 63,000 people in their legislative district. And that includes kids who aren't old enough to vote yet, people who didn't bother to vote, people who couldn't make it out to vote, people who voted against them. In terms of defining what an assault weapon is, you know, it's pretty simple to write a piece of legislation. As the woman in the back mentioned, all you have to do is say any gun that can fire more than X amount of rounds in a certain period of time. You can give names to them, you can call them anything you want, but you know, last time I checked, a single shot bolt action rifle doesn't allow you to mow down 60 people in, you know, 30 seconds. And I understand people always go, well, you know, people get killed with baseball bats and knives, and you know, there aren't mass shootings done with baseball bats and knives. We always get into this discussion of you're either for guns or you're against them. The most of the people that are out there fighting against any regulations right now say they draw the line on the other side of assault weapons. Because when you say to them, how about a grenade launcher? How about a nuclear weapon? And they go, oh no, I'm not crazy. Oh, okay, good. Then the discussion is about where we draw that line, not that there shouldn't be a line drawn.
We have a mental health problem in our country. In 2014, more than 1,700 people died of suicide in the state of Pennsylvania. 300 of those folks were veterans. 60% of those veterans died from firearms, suicide by firearms. Of the civilians that died, 50% of them were from firearms. The problem that we have goes far beyond our schools.
The mass shootings almost always have a connection to past domestic violence. We need to look at that. We need to teach our young boys how to handle their anger, and we need to in particular help our young men understand that there are ways to solve their problems that do not involve violence. The other thing I want to address very quickly is the young student who said that she's hearing a couple of things. One is, what you're doing is not going to make a difference. I disagree strongly. You've already made a huge difference. What can you do? Be influencers. Push from the ground up. Grassroots, you guys own it right now. Force the adults to be accountable for the world that we're making you live in. We can do better by you guys. Use the power you have right now, please, and vote.
I don't think it is ever wrong for young people to be involved in civic engagement. We need more young people to be engaged in the type of work that is happening here with the young people in this room. I don't think in our schools today we do enough to talk about civics. I think we have a lot of young people who don't really understand how their government works. And I think it's important to know that advocacy and action at the local level is really where it's at.
I was thinking about a letter to the editor that someone who supported our campaign wrote and said he's a teacher and a gun owner, and said that in his personal experience, it was easier to buy a gun than to go on a field trip with an elementary school. And that, I just think in terms of the framing of this, like seriously, in terms of the framing of this and what that means around the access to weapons in this country and the way that we are imbalanced on this conversation. No way should we arm teachers. No way should they be carrying weapons to pretend, and to hear teachers talk about what they would be faced with, to shoot one of the students that they've nurtured. It needs to be about coming to a better solution around who has access to guns and how we, as a society, deem that that's okay. But back to the question of people of color and communities of color and how communities of color have been disproportionately impacted by gun violence. I take that back constantly from my experience of living and working in hard-hit urban communities. That this is an economic issue, first and foremost, and making sure that people have access to opportunity in this country
When we talk about opportunity and the pathway to the American dream, the opportunity to reach a middle-class lifestyle is so far out of reach of so many people today, both in our cities and in our rural places. And we need to make sure as a country we're talking about that and what that means, the fear that it creates for people who don't see a pathway forward, the opportunities that are presented on the other side, like gangs or others that provide a pathway rather than one that we want to see collectively. So that's why, that informs most of the policies that I fight for around creating opportunities for working families and people who have been most hard hit. Back to that question of campaign finance reform, can't come soon enough. We have got to overturn Citizens United, even if it takes what can you do if you're 17? Talk to everybody you know and see if they're registered to vote. And honestly, I don't even care how they vote at this point, but getting the engagement, like Mike was talking about, is so important to the fabric of our democracy.
I have no interest in hunting. I have a gun because it's my right, and the only problem I have with the NRA is that they concede to take away small bits of my rights, and I don't want any of it taken away. So, the question I have for our local government and our state government is, why do we value the lives of our elected officials and our public service employees more so than we value the lives of our children in schools?
You're protected by armed guards with automatic weapons.
Metal detectors, I'm still talking, please. When I hear common sense, the only thing that I think about when I hear that is common sense says the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
I am really excited that there are like a lot of different opinions in the audience today. I'm really happy that NRA members came and that clearly like there were some gun activists that have shown up to have their voices heard. I think that everybody needs to have their voices heard at these kinds of events. I think that we need to have these kinds of community conversations. We can't live in our bubbles. We need to talk to each other. And I'm really thankful to the candidates that decided to show up today. I think, what I do think is that nobody, not the NRA, not abortion rights advocates, nobody should be able to buy off our politicians. I think that there should not be any lobbyists, any industries that are able to control our politicians. And Congressman Lloyd Smucker was invited to this event, and he received a phone call every single day, and he did not respond to any of the students. He instead responded to LNP and decided to attack the organizers of this event. Like, Congressman Smucker should be here, and the fact that he's not here just shows that he's not willing to listen to people that disagree with him.
Every day I'm tasked to protect 600 kids. That's not including staff. Before I became a sworn police officer in this Commonwealth, I had to pass 3 mental health evaluations. Even with all my training, graduating top of my class, I still had to sit with a mental health evaluator 3 times before the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania said it was okay for me to have a firearm. I think it's absurd that we can buy firearms and not require a mental health background check.
These debates, I hear people say that like responsible gun owners are sort of being punished by questions about gun reform and comprehensive background checks and things like that. But I also feel like I hear a lot about quote-unquote accidental shootings and children that get access to guns because they're left on the seat of a car and that kind of thing. And so that sort of contradicts a responsible gun owner for me. So I guess I'm interested in, if people want to exercise their Second Amendment right and own a gun, what can we do to make sure that they are responsible with that? What can we do to regulate that and say, you have to keep it locked up in a safe? There will be checks of your home to make sure that you are keeping it responsibly and that children don't have access to it.
I'm very impressed with everybody that organized this event. Everybody that showed up. I like all the passion. I have a few problems though, and it seems like there's a lot of misinformation that people are getting on guns. Like, you know, the word assault rifles being thrown around all over the place. The death rates of these mass shootings in schools and everything has been dropping considerably every year since the 90s, but you won't hear that in the media. The world is becoming a safer place.
One mic, thank you.
So, and one more thing. The Second Amendment isn't a right granted to us by our government on a piece of paper. Our right to own and bear any kind of weapon, in my mind, is granted to us from our God. We deserve the right to protect ourselves.
What are your thoughts on requiring gun owners to take a test to prove that they can operate a firearm safely?
I think part of common sense gun law in this country should be about the same way we look at common sense, not direct correlation here, but how we treat things like vehicles. We're licensed, trained, insured.
Some of these arguments are illegitimate. They're disingenuous. I'm glad we're all here talking about it. We need to talk about this stuff, and we need to hear all the voices. But we've also got to be honest. For every one felon, legitimate felon, who is shot by somebody with a gun, a citizen with a gun, 34 other people are killed. So I'm not sure where some of the statistics are coming from, but 1 to 34 is...
One mic, please, one mic. Hey!
There are things we can do. There are things that are currently in the Pennsylvania legislature that are in process right now, and hopefully they will continue to roll through. There's a process of trying to close the long gun loophole, where you have to have a background check to purchase a long gun. I think that's fair. I think most folks in this room would think that that's fair. It shouldn't be harder for me to purchase Sudafed at the pharmacy than it is to purchase a gun. If you are a gun owner, and to the point of being a responsible gun owner, if your gun is stolen, you should have to report it. That should be a law. Currently, it isn't. So for everyone who talks about criminals getting their hands on guns, most of those guns that criminals possess are stolen from someone. Tell the folks in Harrisburg, our schools need more funding. Our schools need more funding. It's really hard to see who's being picked on and who's being bullied when you got a class of 35 kids. We need more human resources. We don't need bulletproof glass. Our current legislature keeps cutting the amount of funding that goes to our public schools. If you don't like what's happening in your schools, get some different people in there.
When the kid gets killed and it's, well, you know, gee, we had this gun sitting around the house and the 2-year-old shot the 4-year-old or vice versa, nobody goes to jail. It's listed as an accidental shooting instead of an irresponsible use of a deadly weapon. And I'm not suggesting that the 4-year-old go to jail. But at some point in time, if we want to talk about ourselves as responsible gun owners, then we have to be responsible. And that's on all of us. I mean, I really get concerned when we say we're going to turn these schools into fortresses. Because the notion that a kid's going to every day walk through a metal detector, and I walk through a metal detector every day when I walk into the Capitol, and I go, it's like, okay, so I have to be protected by a metal detector because some lunatic's going to try and shoot me? Is that, I mean, that's what it says to me every time I walk through that metal detector. I don't think kids should have that sense walking into school every day.
I just want to say they put in so much work for this. They, organized. They've been running the mics, keeping time, came up with the questions for this. So please give them a round of applause.